beating or abusing somebody or, truly acting racist, let's say, while he was doing this.
Try to do them quick. It seems like everyone's kind of veering to some version of open border. That's somehow something kind of. So tell me.
Where do you get this?
Well, I don't consider.
I'm a Democrat.
No, I don't consider myself a Democrat. I don't consider myself a Republican, but I'm definitely not a Democrat.
I have not heard one candidate.
Well, they won't say it, but the policies seem. And I have to say that my brain is still in recovery mode from taking in so many high-level important ideas. Believe it or not, I actually consider myself a liberal. I consider myself an old-school JFK liberal. It's just that the things have been flipped in such a crazy way. Believe it or not, Well, do you think there's a little bit of a risk in sort of, a couple of times you're referencing the genocide of the Jews to slavery. Seems like a little bit of a slippery slope there, no?
I don't even know how we can say that, actually, and I say that as a Jew. If you read up much on slavery, we're talking abject slavery day. Nobody's in a contest. Nobody has a monopoly on human suffering. This was abject slavery.
Well, do you think there's a little bit of a risk in sort of, a couple of times you're referencing the genocide of the Jews to slavery. Seems like a little bit of a slippery slope there.
Welcome to the Michael Brooks Show, where we are broadcasting from downtown Brooklyn, USA, where we say each and every week, Lou La Livre with super producer Matt Leck.
Yo.
Chief economist recently returned from Spain. Roving correspondent David Griscom.
Hola.
Oh, how's your Spanish doing?
Pretty vile.
Pretty vile. You didn't pick anything up. On this week's program, John Iadarola from the Young Turks. We are talking about AOC's endorsement of Bernie Sanders, the state of the race, centering a global Green New Deal. Then Artesia Balthrop, she's coming in studio, one of our roving co-hosts, like Alona Minkowski, will be back soon. And we're talking about how Lebanon, Chile, Iraq, Haiti, Ecuador, it all fits a global pattern of a rise against neoliberalism that is transcending sectarian politics and really anchoring a potentially new type of uprising. Also, why is it that uprisings like in Hong Kong that are centered in part on liberal rights get valorized here, but ones that are focused on a broader set of economic rights are either ignored or obscured? Wonder why. Evo Morales looks as if he's won re-election for a fourth term in Bolivia. There's some controversy, but there's also a record, a mixed record, but one with some very significant success that we will get to as one of the icons of the pink tide holds on. Plus, GEM, medical debt crisis, the Hillary Clinton Tulsi Gabbard drama. There's some serious points, but also a lot of not serious points. Nina Turner is on it. Bernie Sanders is back. Don't listen to a word DJ Envy has to say about politics or really anything else. And Lin-Manuel Miranda and George Clooney, bad, not good, very bad for you. And of course, a shout out to the Chicago's teacher strike as part of that same global synchronized movement. But first, let's talk about how to protest and how not to protest. Extinction Rebellion is an incredibly important group, one we've actually shouted out on this show before. It's very important to center the urgency of the global ecological crisis. In fact, we are going to center more of it and work on more of that on the show. From the global deployment of renewable energies, the horrific costs of global resource conflicts, and the need to preserve ecology, promote different forms of farming and agriculture that move us away from chemicals and towards greater ecodiversity. These are really important and laudable goals. And even if I don't agree with all of Extinction Rebellion's politics, I am willing to support people putting their bodies and their energy out there for something so existentially important. Now, there's debates within the environmental movement. Are we centering human experience, or are we trying to decenter the human experience when we talk about the environment? Is there a way of balancing, moving away from a sort of egocentric human view of that replicates the idea of dominance or dominion over the earth, which is absolutely problematic and is splitting and is separating from nature, but then at the same time also doesn't go into the problematic tendencies of deep ecology, which in between sort of erasing the distinct aspects of the human experience can even echo a reactionary and anti-humanist politics. We have to be real about this. If you look at the terrorist in Texas's manifesto from several weeks ago, it was a call of racism. It was a call of white supremacy. It also was something with some very perceptive environmental analysis. And that is why, if we disconnect the reality that the ecological crisis will subsume all of us from a humanistic, empathetic impulse and serious, grounded Marxist politics, it will go in very problematic directions. From the worst, from eco-fascistic terrorism, to what in this case was clearly a huge mistake and just absolutely strategically catastrophic and foolish. And this is Extinction Rebellion's protest on the tubes in London. Let's play a minute of it. And of course, I just want to say these activists, we're playing this tape now, are stopping train traffic here. So this is disrupting people's day, their ability to get to work. And
not in the financial district either.
And not in the financial district. These are working people. This is catastrophically stupid. Now, these people were eventually pulled off the train and beaten, which of course we also is terrible. And you know, but this is a disaster. Eventually, these guys are going to get pulled off the train, and it turns into a brawl. The action, last week, and this is at the Canning train station, commuters were held up by a demonstration by a few Extinction Rebellion protesters. The action was extremely unpopular, both within the general public and within members of the Extinction Rebellion movement. Let's remind ourselves, Extinction Rebellion is still doing a lot of very smart, very important, and strategically targeted direct actions. Extinction Rebellion leadership released a statement acknowledging that the action was divisive and that many of the members were not in the action, and that those who acted, quote, planned their action autonomously within Extinction Rebellion's principles and values centered around nonviolence and compassion. I don't know if it's compassionate, frankly, to interrupt people's way to work in an incredibly pressed global economy. Now, let's look at the contrast. These are there's a movement going across Chile right now, which we'll talk about more later in the show. These Chilean activists and what set off the movement in Chile was a increase in fares on public transportation imposed by the Piñera government. Check out what these activists in Chile did when they occupied this subway station. They let people in for free because a goal of a social movement, and by the way, any strategic environmental movement is in fact free public transportation. There's no ecological plan where human beings all just sort of fold back into the woodworks. There's still going to be cities. There's still going to be civilization. There's still going to be work and transportation and business and things like that. So the question is how do we radically downscale the implications of that? A major part of that, ironically, is in fact public transportation, which they were disrupting in London. And what does this do? Well, it reinforces the notion that the ecological crisis is something that is only occupied with by basically wealthy people, that is not attentive to issues of class or race or other vital dynamics. And you have to be able to discern the difference between these two tactics in building a movement against austerity or for the global environment. Or put it this way, here is my response as presented through Jagmeet Singh on a TikTok of how I think about the Chilean model versus the Extinction Rebellion model.
Nope. Yep.
And of course, nope. Chile is the yup. Extinction Rebellion is the nope. For those who treat politics as some game, like LARPers, there's no help. But there can be no help. But for those who are genuinely are working to build a better future across class lines, build a better future. That makes mistakes and self-reflection crucial. Building mass movement politics is not easy, and it's vital to meet people where they are. You cannot force your value system or your subculture on them. You have to meet them where they are and build out from that. Without class analysis, we're lost. The strategic failure of the Caning Town action is one of a lack of class analysis, context, and putting your desires over the interests of a broader group. Successful political action makes the desires of the group clear and the forces that are suppressing these desires clear as well. Lashing out mindlessly against the quote-unquote system creates more confusion, unintended enemies, and suggests that the cause of the environment is for the few, not the many, which is a fundamental strategic and moral mistake. You guys have anything you want to add?
I would just add that, as we build more mass movements and especially protest movements, we have to be very clear about our strategies. Not only that, they're helping build the movement, but also the rhetoric that's within them. So what's dangerous sometimes or unfortunate about these kind of actions that treat workers getting on the train, it treats them almost as if they're mindless cogs in a machine rather than individuals who have obligations and responsibilities to provide for their families. Right. And if that's what you see when you're walking around the city, you've really fallen to like the worst form of capitalist realism. And that's absolutely what we need to be fighting against. So it's really important that when we're building movements, as we saw in Chile, that you're bringing people in and also meeting them at their own material interests and not trying to steamroll over them.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the whiff of misanthropy to do with that type of action is just really, I think, off-putting.
Yeah, I mean, it's a disaster. And I think this is where there's an author that Zero Books has published whose name is totally escaping me right now, sort of recentering a human-centered environmentalism. Look, I'm actually somebody who thinks there was a really interesting book that came out years ago called The Ecology of Eden. And to make one takeaway was that the history of the environmental movement in so-called Western societies was an attempt to synthesize city with country, which culminates in the suburbs, which is the most disastrous thing for the environment possible. And then his other argument was basically that there should be parts of the earth which are really untouched and really not disrupted. And then that actually human beings should mostly live in urban contexts. It is a better way to live ecologically, and that ecosystems need to then be created like, the way Central Park actually grafts on to ecosystems that connect it to upstate New York, and then it expands and expands and expands through trails that aren't interrupted or through farming systems or things like that. So my point is I have no problem with, and then of course the whole other issue which is vital is the protection and solidarity with First Nations people, where that's a question of both genocide and ecocide in a place like Brazil. But this other tendency to just say that like human beings are simply a distraction and a blight on the earth is either a global failure and misandry, or as Matt says, or it gets really specified. And that is where we have to say, deep ecology is a very important movement, very worth reading. I think Heidegger is a very important philosopher and worth reading. But then if we're going to take all of it in, it isn't just guilt by association. It's a through line of thinking that says, why is it that some people in the 80s, and granted they were extreme fringe, but it was a tendency suggested that things like AIDS might be beneficial because it would lower the human population. And then you correlate that with Heidegger's writing on ecology, and you also recognize that, like, yes, and Heidegger was also a Nazi. You have to be extremely clear about the intellectual origins of these things and then what you're contextualizing it in. The environmental movement, ecological movement, needs to be pro-human.
We've already talked about this in the context of the presidential debate, too, with that question that CNN town hall given to Bernie Sanders about, basically reproductive health in the third world. And
Horrifying.
Yeah, exactly.
Horrifying.
It's not theoretical that connection's being made. It's being made more and more explicitly.
More and more explicitly. And then that's another terrifying correlation, right? Because why is it that then I see the discourse of a certain type of someone who's on the grassroots and might be drawn to something like Extinction Rebellion, sounding like some of the most creepy, sinister Bill Gates population initiatives I've ever heard in my life. And that's where I'll also cite Liz Franzik and put on the table. This is the only reason, by the way, for those of you who saw the Tim Pool Sam debate, which I literally cannot watch, it is the most embarrassing. Honestly, I'm not fucking around. It's one of the most embarrassing things I've seen in my life. When Tim Pool, when his beanie lit up with the Thanos analogy, the reason I know, I don't watch the Avengers movies, the reason I know about Thanos, and apparently Thanos is the villain in the Avengers movie, but he's a conflicted villain because supposedly he's trying to kill off a certain part of the human population so as to protect the global environment. And Tim Pool, he just hung Sam out to dry because he made the point that, of course, Sam is Thanos. I'm embarrassed I'm even talking about this. But Liz Franzik, who's been on this show, super smart, she made the point, probably on her podcast, I'm assuming, True Anon, that just as a cultural matter, why is it that that viewpoint is becoming like a sympathetic villain to be valorized, right? Like, you got to be very conscious of these discourses, not in a conspiratorial sense, but in a cultural replication sense. And as environmental concerns become more just literal reality, which they already are, global migration patterns, early deaths, things like this, if you don't center them, as Joshua Kahn Russell would say, within a context of justice, they are going to get filtered through every other toxic capitalist and authoritarian system we're operating under. I mean, and this goes back to, Gramsci. This goes back to even the critique of like all the cancel culture trash. Don't replicate dominant culture. You need to escape the parameters. And if the environment gets filtered through that, it is going to turn into, horrifying neoliberal nudge control or fascism. And so this stupid tactic is a symptom of not having that analysis and that anti-human impulse. That you weren't, this is not shutting down an Exxon board meeting. This isn't even, trying to stand. And I would not recommend that anybody do this because I think these people will run you over. But this isn't standing out in front of a Maserati dealership and saying, no, right? That at least would have some register of we're attacking conspicuous consumption. We're attacking greed. This is working people going to work. I mean, it's so delusional and stupid
the
to
problem
attack that.
is the premise in that action would be like because I tweeted about this and people defended it on the grounds of raising awareness, and that's not the problem we're up
Raising
against.
awareness that I hate fucking environmentalists.
Exactly, right? It's not the problem with awareness. People know something needs to be done about climate and carbon. The problem is power, so direct your actions toward them.
And I would also add that fundamentally a big problem with this action was that it was individual action. So these were members of a group who the group told them they don't want them to pursue the action, but they took it on themselves, right? And this is something that could be very damaging. You know, I cut my teeth in Occupy, and that was something that was always very frustrating when you had a group of people and we were trying to organize actions together as a mass, as a group, as a people, so that when you see a large group of people, you say, wow, there's people power behind this idea. Versus a couple people causing a huge inconvenience for everybody, and then also, you know, with the emblems that associate them with a larger group. You know, when we're talking about not replicating certain structures, you know, the kind of the desire as an individual that like myself, I'm the one who's going to make the change instead of I'm going to be a part of a movement, right? That's like exactly the kind of thing that we need to be doing is building movements of people, not just relying on individual action, because that's never going to work.
Not atomized neoliberal subjects. All right, let's go to the shout out. Shout out. Let's go to how you doing.
My brain is still in recovery mode.
Shout out.
My brain is still in recovery mode.
Shout out.
From taking in so many high-level important ideas.
Shout out.
From taking in so many high-level important ideas. The dial of ideas. I like talking about ideas. High-level. The exchange of ideas. Shout out. High level. Still in recovery mode.
Looking forward to sharing more ideas.
Chicago teachers are striking. They're on the streets. Here's some footage of it. We're going to talk with Micah Utrick about it soon. He covers it incredibly well in the Jacobin and the Guardian. Basically, teachers are out. The new Mayor Lightfoot, has not fulfilled her commitments to showing up for teachers' needs in several months since she's been in office. There was an initial relief that the ever disgusting, ever odious Rahm Emanuel was gone, but the new agreement is not come into place, so teachers are back out on the streets working for what they and the children of the city need. And in the tradition, I mean, Chicago's teachers union is so important and so admirable. They put this on the map in 2012 in an extraordinarily politically courageous move when literally the central axis of the neoliberal Democratic Party was in the White House, not to mention running the city of Chicago. And they, when it was so trendy to valorize charter schools and demonize teachers, went on the streets for the city. And in this round, they've even expanded it. They have demands now related to rent control, affordable housing, and other essential elements of how you actually secure education and dignity for all. So props to the teacher strikes in Chicago. All power to them as they struggle against Mayor Lightfoot and the ongoing neoliberal consensus, which we will break. All right, let's do a little pitch, and then we'll get to our buddy John Iadarola. First of all, I just want to say tomorrow will be 1 month out from the Philadelphia live show in Philadelphia, November 23rd at the World Cafe. All ages, everybody can come to the show. There's been a lot of disappointed people in the last couple of shows. So wherever you are coming from, whatever your age, you can get tickets to the show. We're well over halfway sold out. And there's usually a big surge in the last, particularly week of these things. So I would get your tickets now, and just so you don't have to worry about it, because there's definitely going to be a huge surge in the next month or so. Grab your tickets. Special guests, Artesia Balthrop, who you'll be seeing soon, the great Crystal Ball from Rising on the Hill, the mega excellent Emma Vigeland from the Young Turks. We're going to have an incredibly fun time. Snag your tickets now. I'm incredibly excited about all three of these guests. Become a patron. You guys know how important it is. That's the whole way this show happens. That's over 99% of the revenue. There's like a little bit from YouTube, but that's incredibly inconsistent and, bullshit because it's YouTube. But the great liberating thing is that we have this powerful, amazing community. And so we're able to cover things in a real deep and meaningful way that hopefully forwards, our shared aspirations. So we're honored to do it. We need to get to 3,000 patrons and then 4,000 and then 5,000, obviously. But 3,000 is the next immediate goal. And as of start time of this show, we're 80 patrons away from meeting that. So if you've been sitting on the fence, go jump into the game. If you tapped out for a little while, rejoin. If you've already been a patron and your financial situation has changed, let me know. We'll hook you up. And incidentally, on the DL, if you need a hookup or a deal or whatever, just let us know generally. But we do have, the price points, if you can, pretty consciously thought out, because between all of the different content that we do for this show, this is definitely a beyond full-time job for me. And the whole crew is putting in a lot of work for it, because we have the illicit histories on Sunday, the idea primers, the post games are literally their own shows, essentially. We're doing additional streams on YouTube. I do 2 additional ones a week, plus the 6 o'clock streams, which we do from time to time. The theory readings, the Discord community. You're getting and then this is a long format, highly produced show. So everything helps. We put a lot of work into it. We're incredibly proud that we can give you that global viewpoint and accentuate the incredible voices that we have to get on this show and give you these really good resources, arguments, and also things like AOC Trump, which will be debuted later on the show. Like, when Pocahontas asked if I would endorse her, I said no. How stupid are we? Okay. We have a friend, and tonight we have a patron, actually. We have patrons who visit us from time to time. Welcome. Is it worth it to be a patron? Absolutely. You heard it, folks. All right. We're going to take a brief break, and we will be right back with John Iadarola from the Young Turks.
Asking about courage earlier, one of the things that I have watched quite frequently is the way that people respond to being mobbed on Twitter.
Yeah.
Now I've almost stopped looking at Twitter. It's been about 3 months that I've taken a Twitter hiatus, let's say. I still post. I don't even have my password anymore. I send what I want to post to a third party and they post it, because it keeps me out of the...
An antiseptic distance.
That's right, exactly. And that's exactly the right way of thinking about it. People, civilized people, and I mean that in civilized, socialized people, cannot tolerate being mobbed. Because,
no, they can't.
And there's a reason for that. You see, you said, with regards to the British Columbia Human Rights Tribunal, if there's 16 people on one side and one on the other, you might be thinking that the 16 people are right.
More or less.
Right. But then you think of the situation where you've said something on Twitter and, 1,000 people mob you publicly. Your first response, your first response is going to be to examine your own conscience and see how you transgressed. It's not really much different psychologically. It's lesser, I suppose, but it's not that much different than waking up one morning and coming to your door and finding a mob of your neighbors angrily aggregated on your lawn. It's a terrible shock for people, and it really hurts them. They're often, by all accounts, damaged for lengthy periods of time by this, and their first impulse is to apologize, which is truly the wrong thing. Like, the right thing to do. Well, the right thing to do is to understand that if you haven't done anything wrong, you don't apologize. Now, that's very difficult. It's very difficult. And then to wait, because if you wait 2 weeks, people will come to your defense. But it takes the people who will come to your defense 2 weeks to get their act together, where it takes the activists who are unbelievably organized 15 seconds to mob you.
Welcome back to the Michael Brooks Show. I am Michael Brooks. Joining us now is friend of show, John Iadarola. He's a co-host on the Young Turks, and he's host of the Damage Report, which everybody needs to be listening to or watching. John, thanks for being here, man. How you doing?
How's it going? Glad to be here.
It's going well. Very happy to be talking with you, as always. Bernie Sanders, I do think, is back. What do you make of the last couple of days, last week, in terms of, I read it as like really getting back into like the seriousness of this campaign, being honest and real about the unique things that Sanders is offering, and AOC and Ilhan Omar and I think Rashida Tlaib really showing that they're committed to a political project.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think that Sanders has always been an amazing communicator for both his values and his political goals. The issue has been in this campaign and in 2016 that of the vast majority of the media, the mainstream media is incredibly disinterested in really covering those things. They have no interest in sort of helping him to communicate about that stuff. But right. I think one of the best things about having AOC and Ilhan and hopefully eventually Rashida doing their endorsements, but more importantly, going around the country speaking for him, is I think if the message isn't coming directly from Bernie, it's far more likely to get picked up by the mainstream media. Like, I think AOC, saying Bernie's words, because she has her own authenticity, but also they don't sort of see her in the same way. She's sort of like more acceptable for some reason on the mainstream media. I think it could be really important in broadening his reach to people who might not be getting their news from people like us who are, far more interested in Sanders and that movement.
I actually have a thought about that, but just coming in right now, Bernie Sanders and Rashida Tlaib are going to hold a rally in Detroit. What is the date?
So that is going to happen. Okay.
Yeah, that's confirmed for Sunday, October 27th. So,
okay.
Look, again, I think, obviously Rashida, like Ilhan and AOC, is actually politically committed, so she's going to endorse Bernie Sanders. I think, though, the media question is interesting, and we'll get to a clip of AOC in a minute. Because, look, there's no question that, part of the issue with Sanders is highly, bizarrely, and weirdly personal. And, the relationship that a lot of people in the mainstream media and corporate media have to Bernie Sanders is actually really quite sick and bizarre and disturbing, and it can't be described structurally entirely because it is like a weird personal animus, which is, again, just unhealthy and weird and bizarre. But I do think beyond that, I mean, part of the reason is obviously that he does represent a genuine contradiction to the prevailing politics, the hegemonic ideology of the corporate class of this country. And I think that, especially in AOC's case, Ilhan is more complicated. Ilhan has already been, people have really tried to demonize and destroy her for speaking out on behalf of Palestinian human rights, as an example. But I think in AOC's case, while AOC had not endorsed Sanders, which in my view was a mistake. I think that she should have done it from the outset. But being that as it may, while she hadn't endorsed Sanders and while she was, she uses her social media in a very nice way and she'll throw David Frum a retweet or whatever. I think there's a contingent of people who don't take policy seriously. They don't take politics seriously. It really is just a TV show to them. And, AOC fit into the TV show. And now the tension becomes, I think you're partially right, but I also think you're going to start to see a lot of them kind of turn on her, as they already have, and essentially erase her as a political agent. Like, if you're not just like a nice pop culture symbol, if you're actually renewing your commitment and continuing to say what you've already been saying, but we're not paying attention to because we don't care, that's going to become more problematic. And I think that some of the people that have been willing to hype some of these leaders up are going to discard them now that they're, showing up for the movement, basically.
Yeah, it's interesting especially with AOC, but it's pretty true of the others as well. I noticed today, I hadn't seen that. Ilhan Omar has 1.7 million Twitter followers. Mm-hmm. I had not actually thought that. I knew that she was, she was big, but that's pretty massive compared to a lot of other members of Congress. And she's only been around, for less than a year. With AOC, she blew up so fast that you get this grace period where everybody loves you, you get invited on every show and everything. And then it enters into this period, like with a new singer or a new video game, where everyone is sort of sniffing around to see, can I get something out of casting this person aside?
Right.
And so I think that some of the more mainstream media personalities that were quite friendly with her, I think you're reading it right. Now that she is embracing this person that they find to be fundamentally unacceptable for a number of different reasons, both personal and ideological and rhetorical, honestly. We could add a lot of O's to the end of that list. They're ready to cast her aside, but it was only like a month or two ago that the New York Times had that article about how AOC learned to play by the Washington rules, and I saw some progressives wondering, like, is she not going to be endorsing Justice Democrats? And they were wondering if, her day in the sun was just about to end. And now, she's endorsing Jessica Cisneros and she endorsed Bernie over other people. And so I think that because she's so high profile, basically everybody is watching for some sign that she's not the person that they initially got hyped up about.
I think you're totally right. And I mean, I would include myself there, although I do think that, there's some very substantive criticisms that are already there in terms of some of the ways she's handled foreign policy. And
you're talking about AOC?
Yeah. I think with Venezuela and the Middle East and even just the kind of tentativeness around other issues that again, I always critique not from the perspective of I'm not a purity person and I'm not my intention of critiquing her was never I think there's a dynamic you're describing where it's either somebody's perfect or we hate them. Mine was, of course, she's obviously good, but I see some problems here. And I would say, yes, I think if she didn't endorse Sanders, I would have a fundamental problem for sure. But she didn't do that. She went and she did do that. And I think that makes a big difference. But I do think with the kind of mainstream media fixation, as long as it's, she's cool and she's a great communicator, that's fine. But, she's actually showing up for this actual agenda? Yeah. No, we don't like her. And, and I think that was a choice she was going to have to make at one point or another, actually, between her base and the approval of those people.
And I think she's going to have to make that choice many times over the course of a career that could end up lasting 30 or 40 years.
Totally. Let's play a clip of her talking at the rally. I thought this really stuck out to me, and I'll get your response to it.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. She was not betting TMBS music underneath her speech at the rally. I was there. I could tell you. It would have been cool.
Last February, I was working as a waitress in downtown Manhattan at a taqueria. I worked shoulder to shoulder with undocumented workers who often worked harder and hardest for the least amount of money. I was on my feet working 12-hour days with no structured breaks. I didn't have health care. I wasn't being paid a living wage. And I didn't think that I deserved any of those things. Because that is the script that we tell working people here and all over this country. That your inherent worth and value as a human being is dependent on an income that another person decided to underpay us. But what we're here to do is to turn around that very basic logic. It wasn't until I heard of a man by the name of Bernie Sanders that I began to question and assert and recognize my inherent value as a human being that deserves health care, housing, education, and a living wage.
John, what do you think about that?
I mean, I think it was amazing. I think it sums up, I think, not just her experience in a way that makes her very relatable, but specifically relatable because a lot of people, probably many who watch your channel on a daily basis, probably went through a very similar thing back in 2015, 2016 in regard to Bernie Sanders. Like, I was already in political media, but it did change. The Bernie Sanders campaign, even in its early stage, changed the way I saw politics. It changed my expectations for what we could actually hope to achieve. Like, I was already in it, but the idea that it could inspire so many people who would have never run for office if not for him is very powerful. Like I said, it's relatable, and even there you saw how she can weave together this personal experience invested with values and tie it specifically to challenges that she has, proposals to deal with. Like, doing all of that in a very short period of time. Like, we're used to politicians giving little sound bites that mean nothing. They seem a little bit clever. Like, she packs so much more into just a minute. And there were a lot of great moments in that rally, but you chose one of the best right there.
No, totally. So I want to get in a few minutes I want to end with a sort of bigger conversation on the Green New Deal. I think you deserve so much credit for continuing to center that. And I think actually the proposal that Sanders has put forward is mind-bogglingly ambitious and is actually another resetting in terms of what you're talking about in terms of expectation sets. But how do you look at the race now? I mean, there's still this like desperate effort on the media to pretend that Sanders is done. Then you have this hilarious New York Times report today that, and I got to be honest, I think rightly, I am terrified of Elizabeth Warren going up against Donald Trump. I'll be totally blunt. I am not confident in that matchup for, as I always say, reasons that are terrible, like serious misogyny, and reasons that are like, she's not a good candidate in some very important ways. And people may want to, I think, kind of delude themselves on that, but we need to look at things a little bit clinically too. And then, of course, just the broader sort of corporate class hating and being terrified of Bernie and even kind of being like, yeah, Warren, maybe we could deal with her, but maybe not. And then this hysterical, like, what we really need is Mike Bloomberg or John Kerry. I mean, like, just like, okay, these are clearly some of the most crazy. I mean, that type of article really does make you think like Donald Trump is a sovereign example of mental health compared to the Democratic Party leadership class if they think that we need to be rescued by John Kerry or Michael Bloomberg. So what's your broader read? I mean, is Bernie in it? Do you accept some of my concerns about Warren? Do you think one of these other, Jesus Christ, I didn't even, God forbid, Hillary Clinton, one of these other people jump in? What's your read on all of that?
Well, I really hope that I'm not being naive, but I have to imagine that there's no way that Hillary is getting into this, right, Michael?
John, I can't promise you that. I think that Hillary Clinton is a highly narcissistic, delusional person. So
yeah.
Now, I would
honestly,
say the civil war between
Warren,
Clinton, and Harris supporters and the amount of clap emojis that would be used could crash Twitter.
Oh my God.
That would be funny.
Oh my God. Yeah, I don't want to get her hyped up to possibly get in. Even like the response to her attacks against Tulsi Gabbard. Like, I understand if you're Tulsi, you have to defend yourself, but I almost want to be like, no, don't engage with her. Keep her out of this process. I don't want her to be a big part of this news cycle, because maybe then she will start to think about entering the race. But look, zooming out, I think that we probably have basically the field that we're going to have. Mm-hmm. I think all of your concerns that you expressed about Warren, I probably share very similar versions of them. I think that on the debate stage, she's shown herself to be better than I would have expected based on my past viewing of her speeches, her academic background. That doesn't generally produce someone who's able to defend themselves well. And she obviously can't do it on the debate stage the way that like Bernie Sanders can. But I mean, she was ganged up on quite a bit by Buttigieg and that type, and in the debate before, Delaney and Bullock and all of that. I thought she did a better job of defending herself, but she was defending herself from largely sort of, centrist or right-wing framing attempts on her policies, not, like, as you pointed out, insane misogyny, insane, anti-Native American attacks and things like that, like what she'd experience if it was Donald Trump. And so I agree, if she was the one on the stage with Trump, I would not be going to those nights with confidence.
Well, I mean, also just like, first of all, also billions of dollars. And I mean, look, like the whole thing with her Native American identity, it's like, first of all, I got to say, like, I do think if somebody wants to bring it up, it's not like an illegitimate criticism. It's overblown, but it's also maybe something that is, I don't think it's illegitimate to talk about. But my inclination, certainly would be whatever, people make mistakes, people like blow it over. But this is an example where it's like the social demands of the professional class inside the Democratic Party and the reality of a general election are just, they couldn't be more antithetical. Like to say like, oh, we won't talk about that because that's unfair or whatever, and we're going to be polite. It's somewhat analogous to the emails. It's like, yeah, you know what? Sure. It's kind of a bullshit issue. Okay. But he's going to run with this, and they're going to run with it. And so, I don't know what the answer and the strategy is, but pretending that the general electorate is like the MSNBC green room is super dangerous.
Yeah. Well, look, I think that Bernie is still 100% in this. All we've got so far in terms of trying to forecast are generally national polls that obviously don't actually mean much. I mean, this is not going to be waged as one big general across the country election. It's going to be individual state level primaries and caucuses. So we should be paying more attention to those. How each of these candidates does in those first few contests is going to be really important for influencing future ones. And I think that Bernie Sanders has a lot of experience in running in those sorts of races. I think that he can probably expect to do pretty damn well, especially in the first few. and with, a good enough showing in Iowa and New Hampshire, maybe Nevada, that could give him the momentum that he needs going into Super Tuesday, which is even bigger this time around than in past elections. The one thing I would raise, though, and I think it's what we talked about the last time I was on the show, is I think that a lot of people are just sort of expecting, they're sort of just like they think that Biden's already done. And
Right.
Biden still, at least in terms of the polling, like, sure, his fundraising is nosediving. It's horrendous. But in the polling, he's still doing okay.
That's right.
And I think that for all of our concerns about what the general election would be like if it was Trump versus Warren, I think that Biden is riddled with issues that would be easily exploitable by Donald Trump and his surrogates. And,
Yep.
I mean, regardless of what you and I might think about Elizabeth Warren actually putting into effect the policies that we actually want, Biden doesn't even pretend. Like, he doesn't even have those to run on as sort of like a symbol,
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. Although, I mean, I've been someone who said from the beginning, like, don't discount Biden. But I have to say at this point, and it feels almost uncomfortable to say this, but again, I'll just be real. Like, I think we're getting like to very basic, like physical cognitive questions about his capacity to keep going. So like, if setting everything else aside, like Joe Biden in 2016 with the same terrible record and, and bankruptcy in Iraq and blah, 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 I would say not only would he be formidable in a Democratic Party primary, I actually think on some level he would be very safe to run against Trump, because I do think there's these other countervailing tendencies of like, I just want normalcy and the guy's kind of charming. Like, I never dismiss the like superficial aspects of politics. I think in 2019, like, it's not just that there's all this like any number of issues with him and his kid that Trump could bring up. It's that I don't even trust his ability to be able to sustain the energy in a day of campaigning to spin it. Like, it's uncomfortable to watch.
He's already not running like Bernie is.
I mean, they're just in a completely different place physically and cognitively. To be honest, I find it like super uncomfortable. As much as I don't like Joe Biden, I don't enjoy watching him have his eyes start to bleed or, lose his thought mid-sentence. Like, it feels to me almost like you have to ask professional questions about the people that are running his campaign. Like, is this like an act of integrity? And I might have made jokes several months ago about this, but honestly, watching it go on, to me, it's like, I don't think this is right.
Yeah, it makes us uncomfortable.
Right.
I guess it's that livish tendency to not want. Like, also, we have a history of people, throwing around health accusations around candidates. Right. And we see the attacks, the completely dishonest, overblown attacks against Bernie Sanders. The last thing we want is to engage in that same sort of BS. And yet, not everyone is physically ready to be president. Not everyone is mentally ready to be president. Not everyone currently in the Oval Office is mentally ready to be president. So we have to be honest, and we have to talk about that. But it does make me uncomfortable too.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not, I wouldn't certainly. That's actually one area I'm always advocating the Sanders campaign gets tougher. I would not use that line of attack, and I actually don't even find it like. This isn't like laying into Biden for being a corporate hack, which he is. It's uncomfortable. But, to me, we're several debates in, and it just is like, I don't think he's got the energy, and I don't mean that in a glib or insulting way. I mean that like, I don't think he's got it. But in the last couple of minutes, John, there was a lot of talk at the rally on the Green New Deal. This is a passion of yours. What did you think hearing that?
Well, look, the fact that was one of the early big applause lines, like, I'm obviously happy about that, but I am still shocked about it. Mm-hmm. This year, I mean, it's been less than a year since that big protest outside of Nancy Pelosi's office. Yep. A lot has happened in that year. But I remember, like, I had, Varsity Prakash from Sunrise on the day after that protest. And like, to see that enthusiasm, I thought, well, this is a great little bit of news But the fact that it was sustained and that it's grown, and not just in the U.S., but internationally, it might not even be the strongest in the U.S. compared to some of what's going on in the U.K. right now, Extinction Rebellion and their protests. They literally were so powerful in London that London had to ban the group from protesting throughout the entire city, and that hasn't stopped them. So it's just amazing. And I'll say, thank you for the credit, that you gave me for talking about it. But I mean, one of the things that I've learned from both watching, Greta and Extinction Rebellion and the Sunrise Movement and AOC is that I have been talking about climate change for years on my show, but very rarely have I been doing it in the right way. And I've learned a lot about how to communicate about that issue from them. There are definitely positive and negative ways that you can focus on a topic. And when it comes to climate change, I think that's an even stronger thing that you have to consider. But the fact that regardless of who ends up being the Democratic nominee, if they become president, they're going to face a tremendous amount of pressure to do something. And the idea that if it is Bernie Sanders, that he could have it as one of the people at his right hand is the person who crafted it and helped more than any other individual in elected government to push through to the popular consciousness, the idea that we need not even bold doesn't encompass it. We need historic action on climate change. I mean, there is nothing that gets me more excited about the next couple of years of American politics than that.
That's amazing. I totally agree with you. I do have to just say, for people who are live streaming and chuckling because I critiqued an Extinction Rebellion protest of the tube in the opening commentary, I would say I co-sign almost all of what John says, except don't disrupt people's fucking commutes.
Yeah, look, and I would be bothered. I would be bothered by it too. There's a lot of ways that really passionate people protest around those issues that I find to be unnecessary or counterproductive. I mean, I'm bad at that sort of stuff. One of the weirdest things for me, I hate chanting. I find it to be a really weird sort of. I don't like it, but it is really effective, obviously.
If you were here, I would have made a joke about. I would have started snapping my fingers to agree with you that I don't like chanting, because if there's anything worse than chanting, it's snapping fingers. But John Iadarola, I appreciate your time so much. Everybody, obviously, you can watch John with the great Anna and Jank and all the other great people at TYT, but definitely make sure you check out the Damage Report. It's a different kind of show. It's a different flavor, and it's led by John, and he covers a lot of really important topics, particularly in ecology. You can download it as a podcast. You can watch it on YouTube. I'm honored to be a guest from time to time on it as well. John, I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, and we're excited to have you out in LA in person.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks, brother.
Okay, have a good one.
Bye-bye. All right, folks, we're going to take a very brief break, and then I should have teased this before. We're going to have a brief visit here because, there's all this talk about only young people backing Bernie, and we're sort of young Bernie bros and all this stuff. And we're going to get a little bit of support in our case. It's a little bit off format. David Feldman, who does a great show called The David Feldman Show, which everybody should subscribe to on podcast. Follow him on Twitter. He wrote for Triumph the Insult Comic Dog as well. And also Bill Maher. Okay. He's got a special message for us. So we're going to break format a little bit. We're going to take a brief break. I'm going to call David, and we're going to come right back with David Feldman. Welcome back to the Michael Brooks Show. I'm very excited now because joining us is an elder statesman of the Bernie Bro movement. He's the host of the fantastic podcast, The David Feldman Show, which features any number of guests from congressional chiefs of staff to Jackie the Joke Man Martling. He's also a brilliant stand-up comedian. He's written for a lot of people, including my favorite Triumph the Insult comic dog, David Feldman. Welcome to the show.
It's great to be with my people, Bernie people. Great.
Bernie.
Thank you for having me on.
It's fantastic. Well, let me just start.
Love the show.
I love your show. It takes up so much space in my phone.
Thank you.
Literally, because it's long.
They're 6-hour shows, but if you invest 6 hours into my show, I guarantee you will find 3 minutes of gold.
David Feldman.
We have a motto. We have a motto on my show. There must be a pony here somewhere.
Why? Look, obviously, you're a man of the extreme left, hard left. You have complained, as an example, that on TMBS, I'm too easy on Israel.
Yes.
That I don't call out Israeli apartheid strongly enough, as an example.
Exactly.
That I might be occasionally giving in to Western press narratives when I even acknowledge that Maduro might have made a mistake.
Yes.
That's your politics. Why is it that you're supporting Bernie Sanders?
Why am I supporting Bernie Sanders?
Well, or who are you?
Because I love Bernie. Well, I'm an old school lefty. You know that about me.
Yes.
I'm an old lefty from way back. I believe in everything Bernie believes in. Every single thing Bernie wants, I want.
Right.
So the question I want to ask you and your listeners is, how do we get there? How do we get there?
Wait a second.
I'm keeping an open mind. I love Bernie, but I'm keeping an open mind.
Well, wait a second. Wait, now I'm confused.
But how do we get there?
Well, now I'm confused, David. I thought that we're having you on to endorse Bernie Sanders as an elder statesman of the Bernie Bro movement. You get there through electing him in a mass, multiracial, working class coalition.
Yeah, but can he win? That's the thing. Can he win? I want everything he wants. You know that about me because I'm an old lefty from way back. But can he win? That's my question. How do we get there? So I think we have to have an open mind. This is part of the political process, and watch the debates and listen. Elizabeth Warren, I have to say, I have to say.
Well, to paraphrase,
very interesting.
To paraphrase Joe Pesci on the 1990s SNL sketch, The Joe Pesci Show. No, I don't know. Bernie Sanders leads Donald Trump. In fact, he polls better. There was just a poll that came out in Iowa that Donald Trump is in a statistical tie with Warren and Biden, but Bernie leads him by 10 points. So surely then you could calm down and realize that Bernie can win.
I hope you're right, but I think Elizabeth Warren, I like Elizabeth Warren. There's something about Bernie. I can't put my finger on what I love Bernie. I do, but there's something about him. I don't know what it is. He's a senator from Vermont.
Right.
Patrick Leahy is the senior senator from Vermont, right?
Right.
And Bernie's a junior senator from Vermont. And
wait.
I don't know.
Oh, wait. Did you just say he was the junior senator from Vermont? Did you just say that, David Feldman?
No, I said he's the junior senator from Vermont. Patrick Leahy is the senior senator. I have nothing against junior senators from Vermont. Some of my best friends when I'm in Washington, D.C. are junior senators from Vermont. I just don't think America is ready for a big, loudmouth junior senator from Vermont sitting in the Oval Office. I can't put my finger on it. I love
wait a second. Wait.
I love it.
Wait.
You know that I love
So
Bernie.
you were saying that Jew-year senators from Vermont are known for being loudmouths?
Bernie's a loudmouth Jew. Your senator from Vermont. That's all I'm saying.
All you're saying.
So,
wait,
that's all I'm saying.
I'm very confused as to how you're pronouncing the word junior with like 5 E's or 10 E's. What's going on here, Feldman?
I don't look. I don't understand what you're talking about. What I'm saying is, listen to me. Listen to me about this. People say, how is, Elizabeth Warren any different from Bernie? And I read their platforms, Michael.
Right.
I'm not a flamethrower like you and Jimmy Dore. I sit down and go over policy.
Wait. So David, so now you're telling me, okay, so you con your way onto my show with a big rigmarole about how you're like, you in your words, I'm like Amy Goodman, except I write dick jokes. You come on my show, and now it turns out that you're one of these, I really like Elizabeth Warren's Medium posts people. Is that what you're telling me?
No, I just think we should have an open mind going into the general. Eyes wide open. Eyes wide open, Michael Brooks. And I'm a lefty from way back. You know that about me.
Well, if you're a lefty from way back, how do you explain?
I love Bernie, but how are we going to get there? How do we get there, Michael? How do we get there?
Well, I would.
Asking.
Well, I mean, the real question you have to answer me is how do we get there with the same model of governance that hasn't worked before? Elizabeth Warren doesn't have a mass movement behind her. She's just saying,
Elizabeth Warren,
I'm clever.
Let me just say something. Michael, hang on for 1 second. You invited me on this show, and I feel this is an ambush quite similar to the way Elizabeth Warren was treated last week during the debates. I was offended. It reminded me of the way Hillary was treated during the debates, quite frankly, the way they piled on poor Elizabeth Warren there. And I thought, come on now. Let's be civil.
So asking Elizabeth Warren, well, I'm confused at this point. Do you even support Medicare for all, David?
I do. I'm all in. I'm all in. And let me tell you something. Before this, I have to say, ambush started, I was talking with some people, and one of my friends said, Elizabeth Warren's plan is identical to Bernie's, right?
Well, no, not right, because... Well, wait, David.
I read both plans, Mike. I've read both plans, Michael.
Well, David, you can't lie on my show. She has not released a plan yet. She has this little section of her website, and she has said that she's going to, in fact, release her own plan in a couple of weeks, which is very suspicious because she had previously said she supported Medicare for all, of which there already is a plan that Bernie wrote. He wrote the damn bill, David. You told me that yourself a couple of weeks ago.
Don't take this the wrong way, but you're a naive fool, okay? She has a secret plan. A secret plan. You don't tell the enemy what your plan is for Medicare for all before you implement it. That way they prevent it. She has a secret plan. For all we know, she may have already given us Medicare for all, and we don't even know it.
So in other words...
It's a secret plan, like Nixon's plan to end the war in Vietnam. Donald Trump had a secret plan to get us out of Afghanistan. That's a winning strategy, Michael. That's how you win elections, by having secret plans to solve the issue of our time.
Well, okay, all right. So of course, if she has a secret plan, obviously the health insurance industry and all of these parasite companies won't fight against it because she's so bureaucratically skilled that it will somehow magically bypass all that resistance. Okay, fair point, David. Well, how do you explain voting for 3 different Trump military budget increases.
I think you're lying about that.
No, you can look it up.
And first of all, I'll get to that in a second. I don't like you demonizing the healthcare industry. I think it's very childish of you to just, you have this idea, and believe me, I want everything Bernie wants, okay? Right. But, healthcare makes up 11/10 of our economy. I want you to get a pad and pencil and do the math here. 11 out of every $10 of America's GDP is spent on healthcare. Okay? So this is something Richard Wolff, Ben Burgess, Harvey K., they're not going to teach you. You don't change 11/10 of our economy overnight. You've learned about Marxism. You need to learn about the incrementalists. Have you ever studied incrementalism? This is something that Ben Burgess doesn't teach. Harvey K. doesn't teach the incrementalists from ancient Greek. The incrementalists. Incrementi. It's a Greek word.
Wait.
Roughly
okay.
It's a Greek word. It's roughly translated. It means focus on identity politics so you get to keep all your money. This is what Ben Burgess, he won't teach you that.
So, wait. David Feldman, okay. So clearly you've come on the show under false pretenses, and I'm going to kick you off very soon. But you do sound a lot like Elizabeth.
This is an ambush.
You do sound a lot like Elizabeth Warren because you're saying on one hand you support everything Bernie supports, which is full government health care.
I love Bernie. I'm an old lefty from way back.
Way back. So you support everything.
All the way back.
You support everything that Bernie supports, but
yes.
Okay, but now it sounds like you think health insurance companies shouldn't be attacked.
I think because they're not evil. As Amy Klobuchar said to Elizabeth Warren, just because you have a different plan than I do, that doesn't mean that I'm evil. Let's stop this. Can we just hang on for 1 second? Stop laughing. Can we stop demonizing the people we disagree with? I watch your show, and anyone who doesn't agree with Michael Brooks is evil. Dave Rubin is evil. Stefan Molyneux is evil. Why? Because you have a plan, and they have a plan, and it's a little different. We all want to get there. I remember what Amy Klobuchar said. We all want to get there. Just because your plan is different than mine, it doesn't mean I'm abusive towards my staff or my daughters hate me. Or the only reason my dad was an alcoholic is because he had me for a daughter. I get it, Michael Brooks. You want to provide health insurance to every citizen so 50,000 Americans don't die each year because they're underinsured.
That's
okay,
right.
That's your plan. I support a plan that brings the number of Americans dying from lack of insurance down to just 35,000 a year.
And that's incremental.
My plan is 15,000 fewer Americans dying each year from lack of health insurance. Now, I don't know about you and your friends over there, but where I come from, saving 15,000 people each year from dying is a lot, okay? Let's dial back the animosity.
Well, I thought there was a lot of animosity in how you kept calling Bernie the junior senator from Vermont. I still don't know what that's about, Feldman.
Not the senior senator. Patrick Leahy is the senior senator from Vermont. And I don't demonize the health insurance people. They're not evil. Not everybody who disagrees with you is evil, okay? They're good people just trying to support their family by playing out the clock on bone marrow transplants for sick kids. That's all they're trying to do. Healthcare industry people have kitchen table issues just like anybody else. Black marble or cream marble. I would go with the cream marble.
Well, David, stop
Yes.
demonizing people.
Well, you've ambushed me on this. I love Bernie. I love him.
David, let me just say, David, first of all, and no answer on the military budget increases by Elizabeth Warren. You've got nothing on that?
If you say, you know what? I had not looked into this, but we need a strong military. I think Bernie would agree with me. I think Bernie's the first one to say, you know, the role of the government is to protect the citizens and get out of the way. Let the animal spirits and the invisible hand of the economy.
Elizabeth Warren is the junior senator from Massachusetts. How would you describe her title?
I would say she's a senator from Massachusetts. She's a senator from Massachusetts. What? What are you laughing at?
David Feldman, I hate you, sir.
See, there we go again. You invite me on the show. It's like the time I did Tucker Carlson.
I hate you.
This reminds me of the time I did Tucker Carlson, and they caught me stealing a copy of Mein Kampf from the green room and asked for it back.
Everybody finds David Feldman's latent anti-Semitism and apologies for the insurance industry at the David Feldman Show, which is a fantastic podcast you can subscribe to on iTunes.
I love being an asshole. I just love it.
I love you, David Feldman. David actually is incredibly smart and supports Bernie. David, have an amazing night. Thanks a million.
Thank you. I love you.
I love you too. We wanted to give people the alternative perspective. So between that and Ryan Grimm, I think you
yes, I spoke too soon. I said Ryan Grimm and Matt Karp sort of encompassed all of the Warren Bernie debate you could have. I think we were missing something.
Yeah, we were missing something about Warren support. All right, folks, we have a lot to get to, and thank God, co-host Artesia Balthrop has arrived. We're going to take a brief break. We're going to talk about this rising from Chile to Lebanon. What is it really about? Then we're going to go to the post game. We're going to talk about all this Gabbard Hillary drama. We're going to talk about why you should never listen to DJ Envy. The new, look, Lin-Manuel Miranda, I think we're speculating that he might be part of a certain organization.
We're not speculating what class he's in, though.
No. We're not speculating that he's not an asshole. More AOC Trump.
Well, actually, he might be a nice guy, but
he might be a nice guy.
But he's not trustworthy because of his class position.
That's right.
Sorry, folks.
Sorry,
Lynn. You can't have a State Department dad and make poems or whatever you make about bourgeois revolutions.
Sorry, your dad works in the State Department, and your music sounds like something almost as basically as embarrassing as listening to Stage Francis, except without fake conscious lyrics. You're gone.
Your dad works in the swamp. Sorry.
Your dad works in the swamp. I love AOC Trump. I'm sorry. And CNN says Bernie's polling low. Fake news. That's the fake news. And then Pocahontas is on every single second. How stupid are we? All right, we're going to take a brief break, and we'll be right back with Artesia Balthrop.
And let me warn the nation against the smooth evasion that says, of course we believe these things. We believe in social security. We believe in work for the unemployed. We believe in saving homes. Cross our hearts and hope to die. We believe in all these things. But we do not like the way the present administration is doing them. Just turn them over to us. We will do all of them. We will do more of them. We will do them better. And most important of all, the doing of them will not cost anybody anything.
It is very, very disturbing when I hear the millionaire or billionaire word. And I've told them to stop it, knock it off.
Spray deodorants, every hack politician in your state, and the latest game between the Boston Red Sox and the New York Yankees. Strangely enough, however, nobody has told you about Gene Debs, one of the most important Americans of the 20th century. Why? Why haven't they told you about Gene Debs and the ideas he fought for? The answer is simple. More than a half-century after his death, the handful of people who own and control this country, including the mass media and the educational system, still regard Debs and his ideas as dangerous, as a threat to their stability and class rule, and as someone best forgotten about.
When he ran for president the 5th time in 1920 as the candidate of the Socialist Party, Eugene V. Debs was 65 years old. He was also an inmate in the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary.
Imprisoned for a 10-year sentence by President Woodrow Wilson's administration for opposing America's participation in World War I, a war which he considered to be an imperialist venture fought between the national ruling classes and using the working class of both sides as cannon fodder. Outspent by the Republicans and Democrats by more than 100 to 1, almost 1 million Americans voted for convict Eugene V. Debs to be their president. Who was Gene Debs?
Eugene V. Debs was a socialist, a revolutionary, and probably the most effective and popular leader that the American working class has ever had.
Debs for president!
Let the wealth of the nation belong to all the people and not just the millionaires.
Production for use, not for profit.
Welcome back to the Michael Brooks Show. Joining us now is esteemed, sometimes co-host and contributor. She's an executive producer and personality, Artesia Balthrop.
Hi, guys.
Welcome back. We missed you.
I missed you, too. I'm glad to be here and really looking forward to the live show.
The live show in Philadelphia, November 23rd, World Cafe. Buy your tickets. People loved you. Oh. Do you realize that?
I mean...
The feedback from your first appearance was like...
They said that I was a star, and I appreciate it. It's just the ego boost I need to get me out of bed in the morning. So thank you to everyone out there.
They're just recognizing the truth.
It's okay. I have a great outfit ready for the 23rd, so you guys show up and see it.
I have no doubt. Waz and I actually talked about that. We're like, wonder if how much time Artesia's cooking up for the outfit.
Really? I just, got to be on brand. Very, very classy and a little pop of color.
Absolutely. That is exactly how I would describe your brand. Let's go to David Griscom. We missed you last week. He was in Spain. He was like, yeah, man, I'm on the street. I'm getting drunk. Here he is with the gem, the Griscom Economic Minute. David, what do we have?
Well, this one's, it's definitely a little bit of a difficult subject. I really wanted to be able to talk about the medical debt crisis that we're facing in this country. We talk a lot about Medicare for all, a lot about wage stagnation, but this is really becoming a major issue for many people and has been for decades. But in the past 15 years, it has really exploded and is affecting so many families. So a 2018 Health Affairs study that analyzed 2016 data found that 1 in 6 Americans have past due health care bills, $81 billion overall. Now, this is really important, and a lot of neoliberals use this actually to discredit the crisis of the medical debt crisis. 53% of those bills are for less than $600. But we talk about this all the time. Most Americans don't have $1,000, set aside for medical emergencies or any kind of emergency. So for many people, especially working people, this can be insurmountable. And if we know anything about debt collectors and just the function of debt in the U.S. economy, these missed payments can really start adding up very quickly. Right. And, insurance itself won't save you. With many people, their deductibles are $1,500 a year. Which is a lot of money for most people. 81% of policies in the United States have deductibles, and the average deductible is $1,500. And oftentimes people, especially more low-income people, have to have very, very high deductibles. So as anything as sad as it is to say in the U.S., whenever there's tragedy, there's opportunity, and debt collections overall is an $11 billion a year industry. And the way that the system works is it really encourages anyone who is a creditor or a debt collector working on behalf of a creditor to really hound people. Because basically the way that it works is whoever gets there first is going to be first in line to get the money. So that's why, if you've ever noticed, if you've ever been in this situation where you have a debt that's like $100 and you have a creditor like banging down your door for $100, it's because the system actually encourages them to really push forward, because if they get in the back of the line, they're very unlikely to be paid. So when we're talking about this, we have to recognize the fact that 66.5% of bankruptcies around the United States are caused by medical debts. That's around 530,000 families that have been devastated by medical debts. And I bring this up, and I was really thinking about this because I was reading a really harrowing piece in ProPublica that everybody should read called When Medical Debt Collectors Decide Who Gets Arrested by Lizzie Presser. And it tells the story, focusing on a small town in Kansas near the Oklahoma border, of a lawyer who is working on behalf of a lot of different creditors, but mainly the local hospital, to harass and harangue folks who are in debt because of medical bills. A lot of times these are for smaller bills, around $600, but oftentimes, these are for families that have just been devastated by tragedy. There's one family where a working man had his wife dying of cancer, and their son also had cancer as well, and they racked up massive medical debt. And what's really harrowing about this story was that the lawyer was basically encouraging the judge to use their powers to hold the debtor in contempt of court, which means they put them in prison. And then when they get out of prison, the judge was applying the bail payments to the debts. So people were being forced into prison for, sometimes around $500 to $600, but sometimes for smaller amounts. And this is a very economically depressed area where a lot of people really are living paycheck to paycheck. And as we've talked about so many times on this show, many Americans really are living in that reality. So it's a very frightening, development. And of course, this is also something we should recognize too, that this coming after low-wage workers, coming after poor people is something that has been growing across the country in the legal system. We hear horrible stories of people being sent to prison for unpaid traffic tickets, etc. So this is something that's not just unique to medical debt, but something that's just so cruel when you see that these are people who are just really struggling to get by. There's no way that we can say that we live in a just society where people are being harassed in this way and being sent into prison. We know that the GoFundMe is a really horrible example of how many people are really struggling to get by and under medical debt in this country. I just wanted to add, two quick things. This kind of exploitation, we talk a lot about the exploitation of bosses to workers, but this is the second level exploitation. And you can go back to Marx. In the manifesto, he writes, no sooner is the exploitation of the laborer by the manufacturer over, that he receives his wages in cash. Then he is set upon by the other portions of the bourgeoisie, the landlord, the shopkeeper, the pawnbroker, etc. And this is something that's very important, because when we're talking about discipline, the way that the bourgeoisie, the ruling class, tries to discipline the working class, debt is a massive part of this, because these are people who are already in difficult situations. You can imagine people who are working full time, who are not making high wages, are being highly exploited. And this is a great way for the people in power to be able to keep those folks down. So this is obviously an important example of why we need Medicare for all in this country. But also, and this is why it's so important to support Bernie Sanders, why Bernie Sanders' plan to eliminate medical debt, that $81 billion that I talked about at the beginning of the segment. Bernie Sanders has a plan to eradicate that medical debt and to alleviate people from this horrible suffering that they've been going through. And also, it should be noted too, to get rid of the private credit industry and replace that with a public credit rating industry, which would be huge for a lot of other reasons, but most definitely for this. It's not enough just to rectify the wrongs in the future. We also have to do as much work as we can to repair the damage that the past has caused.
100%. It's kind of amazing to just sit, like, he's putting on the table complete student debt relief and complete medical debt relief. Those two moves alone, the amount of suffering that would eliminate and the amount of huge activity and liberation in the economy is mind-blowing. I mean, those two steps alone put him in a completely different category, and it's incredible to reflect on the significance of that. I know people are all touched by those issues.
No, they are. And I really highly suggest people taking a second, though, to read this ProPublica piece, because a lot of times when we talk about these issues, we talk about numbers. And when you start to read the personal stories, I mean, it makes these fights so much more real, as they should be, because these are things, as you said, that affect so many people, and they affect us in many different ways. And it's important to have that, human aspect in the struggle as well.
Absolutely. Artesia.
Yeah,
how you doing?
No, I
just,
just wanted to add, it's not just our low wage workers, it's also our barely middle class workers who will never be able to see their full wage because they're trying to pay off debt. Personal anecdote of a friend of mine who had to have life-saving surgery and got scared of the debt collectors who were calling her, so she transferred all that debt to a credit card. And now the interest on that credit card has doubled that debt, and she can't get a personal loan in order to pay that, to transfer it off. So I've just been really educated on how so many vultures come after people with medical debt, not just the medical debt collectors, but then you get the creditors and or the credit card companies as well get to profit off of people's medical debt. And so now this person who makes, six figures, which everybody would celebrate, can't see that wage or see any of her income really is going straight to credit cards. So everybody's eating except us.
Everybody's eating off disease. Mm-hmm. Stay close to the mic. Is she good? She's good?
Okay,
cool.
Got it.
Good. Just want to make sure everybody's hearing what you have to say 100%. I'm going to get into this in a second, from Chile to Lebanon. But just before we do, people on the streets in Lebanon right now?
I do. As you introduced me as, I'm a television producer. I make some of your favorite trashy television.
Yes, indeed.
So I spent a month in Lebanon and Beirut filming 90 Day Fiancé. If you guys tuned into before the night.
Huge fan of that
actually,
show.
A lot of people are fans of this show that you would never think watches reality TV.
Everybody watches reality TV.
They do.
Who's fronting about watching reality TV?
Yeah,
everybody's watching it.
It's crazy. But I never thought that experience, making a trashy television show would have educated me on Lebanon and the politics of that country. While I was there, they had just voted on a new government. And I was shocked to believe that this country had no government or no formal government until that moment. And everybody just kind of carried on like, just any normal day. But you could feel that charge in the air. And
when were you there?
When was I there?
Mm-hmm.
February.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
February. As a matter of fact, like 3 days before I came home, they had voted on this new government. But there was this charge in the air because I could feel from the folks my age, the millennials, they were just not happy. And they had the same gripes that we have here in the U.S. about, livable wage and access and wealth building and healthcare and all of these things that we are working toward as, the progressive community. But they like to burn shit down there. So,
Right.
that's where they differ from us. So
Right.
I wasn't shocked when my peoples are texting me like, yeah, we're burning Hamra Street down, which has my favorite restaurants on it. I'm like, okay, this makes sense. So I just wanted to give a shout out and be in solidarity with my folks there in Lebanon and say we here, myself and everybody in this room, we're watching them, we're rooting them on because they are fighting for the same things that we talk about every single day on this show and our communications with, on Twitter, We're looking at, is this a live look at what's happening right now in Lebanon?
Yeah, throw it up.
Yeah, it says Wu extraordinary scene in Tripoli, Lebanon here.
Got it. Yeah.
Let's
these
wanna
are-
play this a little bit.
This is our generation. This is, millennials, as they like to call us, of, young people who are just sick and tired of it. And they are out here every single night. They're in shifts because they are demanding to be heard. And it's just inspiring.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'll do like a little spiel on this. I think there's some things to think about with regards to, in a very basic sense, from Chile to Ecuador, Haiti, Lebanon, Iraq, and even still what's spinning out of Sudan that we've covered a lot on this show. I would go, if you're a patron, listen to the Illicit History with Ahmed Cabello, and we're going to have him on again the show soon, is that these are anti-austerity uprisings. These are anti-neoliberalism uprisings. These are about economic justice in the broadest sense of the word. And that's really significant for three reasons. One, as you just put it perfectly, this is global and it manifests in a variety of different ways, but it's showing a common pattern of dissatisfaction, whether we're in the post-industrial hollowed out United States or United Kingdom, or even in Iraq and Lebanon, where sectarian governance have produced such dysfunctional outcomes and have sort of kept a tenuous peace, but created these very corrupt, very dysfunctional patronage networks, which correlate and reinforce global capital and have drowned out people's needs. What set off the movement in Lebanon was attacks on WhatsApp. Yeah. And things emerged from there. What set things off in Chile was a fare increase on the subways and on public transportation. The government of Pinera initially told poor Chileans and middle-class Chileans, if you can't afford the fare increase, just ride during non-peak hours. And that was what set things off. And now you have in Chile, they backed down on that wage increase, but they've also had on that fare increase, but they also have military on the streets of the cities in a way that you've not seen since the US-backed Pinochet dictatorship. And I want to say, and then of course in Ecuador, World Bank on IMF plans, Lenin Moreno, a total sellout and capitulator to the United States. Haiti, which is endlessly abused in this tripartite system of US and French exploitation with abusive UN peacekeepers, with World Bank, IMF plans, which have just endlessly devalued the country, a place that had to pay a price for liberating itself from slavery, like a literal price to the French. Yeah. Then you have a corrupt, parasitic local political elite, right? All of these uprisings are happening. And it's very interesting because the ones in Latin America and the Caribbean are not covered in the United States, or they're covered in the generic, like, oh, look at some brown people rising up, whatever. In the Middle East, they're covered, but they aren't necessarily anchored in the real anti-capitalist movements, which they are. Then you go to Hong Kong, where, and again, I've always, look, there's plenty of distinctions inside what's happening in Hong Kong. We can have critiques and so on, but the basic premise that people want to make sure that they protect their liberal rights, we obviously support. And it would be hypocritical and nonsensical, frankly, to not support them. Are there reactionary tendencies? No doubt. All the rest of it, blah, 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 blah. But those protests that are about asserting liberal rights are valorized and obsessed with in the Western press. And movements that are about the economic base are ignored, delegitimized, or misreported. I mean, even if you go back to the Arab Spring, we're going to be talking about Egypt a lot more in the next couple of weeks. If you go back to the Arab Spring, yes, of course there was a student movement, and there was a feminist movement, and there was a religious movement. A major thing that put pressure on the Mubarak regime, which led to that coup, because at the end of the day, it was a coup that removed Mubarak, was when factory workers in the second city of Alexandria started striking. That's when you have the pressure base. I didn't see a single goddamn article in the New York Times about the striking workers in Alexandria. I saw a million articles about how they were using Twitter, because that was back in the day when it was all about jerking off to how liberating these web platforms were, which, by the way, the Sudanese government were pioneers in setting up fake Facebook groups and saying, we're going to be protesting here in this part of Khartoum or whatever. And then they'd show up and it was secret police there to round them up. So these things were never these innately liberating tools. So anyways, I think there's a pattern here. It's a question of capital. It's profoundly encouraging, particularly in the Middle East, the cross-sectarian base and the statements coming out of people saying, I'm Shia, they're Christian, they're Sunni, whatever. We all are not getting living wages. We all are not living well.
Yeah. One of the funny things, though, that I'm watching on social media is coming out of all of us witnessing these protests is people asking, well, why are we burning anything down in the United States? And I have to laugh at that because, yes, it is a global movement that we all identify with. But I have to remind people, whenever we riot in Baltimore or Ferguson, people start crying about the CVS. You know, that's the one burnt down, or the liquor store that they knocked the windows out of. So I definitely want to challenge the progressive community on their idea of rioting and burning things down. Like, if you are in support of burning things down in Chile, I don't want to hear anything about why are they burning down the CVS in Baltimore when they have to take to the streets against police brutality and push back on aggressions in the Black community and wherever we're rioting. So I definitely want people to think about that.
I want people to think, and the reason I say think about all of that is because of legal implications. So these are all things to think about. But I totally agree with your point.
Right, yeah. But
as
I just
a matter
keep seeing
of thought,
the question, like,
as a matter to just, you should sort of grapple with it.
Right.
But there's no doubt. I mean, look, if you're going to have a big romantic reaction to that tactic in Santiago, how are you not going to have the same reaction in Baltimore? By the way, you could have a critique of both. I don't necessarily think burning shit is always the most effective strategy, but uprising and clogging the streets and again, you're absolutely right. To globalize it to the United States too. These uprisings do happen in the United States, and they're demonized and they're terrorized, and they get, by the way, the FBI calls them Black identity extremists, and that literally means people working on racism and policing issues. So that's a hell of a point.
Yeah.
I also think, and even for what it's worth, I mean, even to global it again, like, yes, there were triads that were deployed to beat up protesters in Hong Kong, and there has been a vicious response in parts of Hong Kong. Look at the response of the Macron government to the Yellow Vest protests. They are profoundly vicious, and frankly, I really doubt that they would be allowed to occupy a Parisian airport. And I say that not to justify conduct in Hong Kong. I say that to be really real about the types of crackdowns we're talking about and what isn't and isn't reported as state repression. If you look at the footage out of France, and then we go back, I mean, my God, Ferguson, there's a lot of leaders in Ferguson who have died in ways that defy reasonable explanation.
Just spontaneous combustion.
Yeah, they have spontaneous. Somehow people that have challenged some of the most dangerous, racist, tyrannical police departments in the United States, who've already been found by the Department of Justice to be violating any number of laws, they just sort of, I don't know. They slipped in a shower.
Or stop breathing in their cars. Or,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
mysterious.
Yeah, funny how things like that work.
Mm-hmm. I'm not quite a conspiracy theorist, but that's pretty weird.
You know what William Burroughs said once? And I'm not a conspiracy theorist at all, but I do he said, William Burroughs said, a paranoid person is someone with all the facts.
Mom. My mom. Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, your mom definitely has all the facts.
She has,
yes,
she's seen some things in these Brooklyn streets.
Your mom has facts. All right, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to go to the post game. We're going to talk about the Hillary Clinton, Tulsi Gabbard drama. We're going to play some incredible footage of Nina Turner laying it down for Bernie Sanders. She's going to be a guest on this show soon. I'm very excited about that.
Lovely. I was really excited to see her on that podium. She got me hyped. I wasn't in attendance, but she definitely got me hyped.
She's amazing.
Yeah.
It's time to stop fucking around. Nina showed that. And also Bernie and some other really important stories to get to. This new Lin-Manuel Miranda, Bad in Puerto Rico, and also Hamilton, and we'll take your Discord questions. We might get to some calls. Just recorded an interview with Adolph Reed. It was amazing. Everybody buy class notes. Adolph Reed is one of a kind, and I'm very excited about this interview. It was about 50 minutes. We're going to be playing it on the show soon. And I'll just give you a tease on two other guests that are coming up in the coming weeks. Shama Sawant, who actually I'll just focus on her for now. She's a socialist city councilwoman in Seattle. Amazon is spending $1 million to try to destroy her. Her leadership and her being in office is one of the most important things in American politics. So we need to support her in every way, shape, and form. And she will be on the show soon. And we're going to talk about how we can very much be in solidarity with her. Bernie, of course, has showed up for her, but actually no other frontline national politicians. But we need to do everything we can to protect her seat. We have links to all the ways you can find Artesia's work. She's obviously going to be with us in the postgame. She's going to be with us in Philly. I want to thank the whole team. I want to thank all the new patrons. We're on our way, guys, almost to 3,000. Patreon.com/TMBS. Click the bell so you know when there's going to be a live broadcast. Subscribe. You know all the things to do. We'll see you in the postgame.
Bye, guys.